In the centre of Rome, one iconic monument rises up from the city to remind us of the incredible power of the Roman Empire, the Colosseum. It's the most spectacular building ever constructed by the finest architects of antiquity. It's a wonder of stonework and has withstood not just earthquakes, but the ravages of time. It's not its great size that earned the Colosseum its name, rather a colossal 40-metre-high statue of the Emperor Nero that stood nearby. Some 50,000 spectators would pack into this extraordinary amphitheatre to watch the spectacles offered by the emperor to the Roman people.
So inside the Colosseum you have spectacle, you have energy, you have entertainment.
The gladiators became veritable celebrities. Celebrities who became the centre of attention, according to the doctors who studied their remains.
This celebration of the gladiators was also a celebration of Rome as a military society and of the soldiers who protected the empire.
Roman audiences were also big fans of some astonishingly sophisticated hunting-themed spectacles. The latest studies have sought to uncover clues from the bowels of this huge stone construction that will allow them to understand the technical equipment they used to stage these shows that so fascinated their audiences.
How the devil did they make such big machines?
Every talent and every resource was requisitioned for this imperial monument.
For the emperors, the amphitheatre and the spectacles it hosted were symbolic of their expansionist strategy.
The Flavian amphitheatre could be considered to be the most modern of ancient monuments, and the Romans, the forerunners of our modern entertainment industry. Our archaeologists and historians are hoping to reveal the final secrets of a monument that has been the pride of Rome for more than 20 centuries. Long before the construction of the Colosseum, legend has it that Rome was founded by the twins Romulus and Remus. Over the centuries, the civilization rapidly flourished, and Rome became the capital of the kingdom, then the Republic, and finally of the Empire, when in 27 BC, Augustus inaugurated the Empire in the ruins of the Republic and proclaimed himself emperor.
Augustus had gained absolute control over Roman society, Roman government, and what he tried to do was justify his position by a massive reform program of going back to the good old days when Romans were honest, straightforward, hadn't been corrupted by luxury and wealth and power and greed. And so began a period of very stable growth and peace and prosperity and expansion of the Roman Empire until you get to the reign of Nero.
Emperor Nero left his own controversial mark on history. During his reign, a terrible fire destroyed much of the city, including all the amphitheatres. This was a great loss to the Roman public, who were huge fans of the spectacles put on in such places. This provided an opportunity for Nero to completely redesign the centre of Rome and to build a new imperial palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House, which was famous for its flamboyancy. There was an artificial lake in the immense grounds which were open to the public. Although Nero's largesse made him popular with the plebeians, he was deeply hated by the more powerful Romans who conspired against him.
And finally, in 69 AD, a coup is launched successfully, and he's deposed, and with the help of his slave, he commits suicide.
Nero's suicide in 68 AD marked the start of a dark period for the Roman Empire.
The year AD 69 is known as the year of the four emperors, when it's very chaotic, lots of battles in Italy, and a very shrewd customer, an outsider, a dark horse called Vespasian, comes out on top.
Vespasian came from a modest background, and through his own skill and hard work, built himself a brilliant career as a general in the Roman army.
He was destined for great things, but then in Nero's reign, he unfortunately fell asleep during one of Nero's concert recitals. And the emperor noticed and was not well pleased with Vespasian. And so when the Jewish revolt broke out, it was Vespasian who was chosen to clean up the mess, and it was a mess.
Italy was in the throes of civil war while Vespasian, along with his son Titus, was leading a victorious military campaign in Judea to put an end to the Jewish revolt. He left Titus to finish off the sacking of Jerusalem, to return to Rome and seize power, glowing with military prestige. A short time later, their victory was celebrated, immortalized, in this triumphant arch.
This is the extraordinarily well-preserved Arch of Titus, which was a posthumous arch erected by his brother Domitian, commemorating the sack of Jerusalem in 70 AD. One of the panels in the passageway depicts the spoils seized by Rome from the temple in Jerusalem. And the three pieces of booty, the menorah, the Torah, and the sacred table, carried by elite young Roman men, because most Romans wouldn't have the faintest idea what these things were.
In addition to these symbolic spoils, Titus also brought considerable riches back from Jerusalem that his father intended to use in order to establish their political power and give legitimacy to a new dynasty at the head of the Roman Empire. So Vespasian decided to build the biggest and the most beautiful amphitheater ever seen, right in the center of the capital. The proof was recently provided by a German epigraphist called Geza Alföldi, when he found a hidden message behind the engraving on this marble block discovered in the 19th century beneath the Colosseum.
At the time, nobody knew that the block contained an inscription that was even older, and the holes were completely ignored.
For a long time, nobody suspected that these holes here and there within the engraving in the marble might indicate the presence of another, older inscription.
The holes were used to insert the metal letters that made up the original inscription.
The epigraphists were then faced with an enigma requiring a very good understanding of Latin.
By studying the holes and positioning them one by one on a plan, we were able to get an overall picture and to reconstitute the original text.
Alföldi suggested the original inscription read, "Emperor Vespasian ordered that a new amphitheater should be constructed with the spoils of war."
It wasn't unusual to mention in these inscriptions where the money came from, and the bounty here was so great that centuries later, Theodoric the Great was still talking about the river of riches that had flowed from Jerusalem to Rome.
The inscription tells us that the Colosseum was a monument to a military victory and a hallmark of imperial Roman power. And the fact that it was constructed on Nero's property was another political message, a promise of a return to prosperity and a simpler life under Augustus after the confusion of Nero's reign. But why did Vespasian choose to give an amphitheater to the Romans? How could he be sure that his reputation and that of his sons would profit from it? For Mark Wilson-Jones, an architect who specializes in ancient buildings, this comes down to the very history of the amphitheater.
The early Roman amphitheaters were developed, we think, in the Forum Romanum, in the center of Rome, in a space that's more or less rectangular with a long axis. So the oval is a stretched circle. It suits itself very well to that situation. And so you have this smooth shape which adapts itself within that locality and then could be copied to other situations once it's been proved to work.
Well before the Empire, the Forum welcomed the first gladiatorial spectacles, and it was almost certainly there that the amphitheater acquired the principle of its oval shape. But from a strictly architectural point of view, it's also derived from the theatre.
And you can think of the name amphitheater as bringing two theatres together. But the theatre is a semicircle. You bring two together, you get a circle. And that's a relatively static space. That's not what you want for this dynamic shape. So they have the architectural precedent of the theatre, but they improve it greatly with their own innovation of the oval shape. You can think of the circle as a kind of democratic shape. Everyone's the same. But with the oval, it's got this emphasis. It's elongated, and that gives greater importance to those who are on the short sides. And of course, the emperor is one on the short sides, on the cross-axis.
This oval shape offers a great many advantages. Not simply that all the spectators have a good view of the arena, but the most important people in Rome, starting with the emperor himself, can be seen by the whole crowd. Another major aspect of the architectural design of the monument is the use of the fornix, a motive that facilitates the creation of such a gigantic oval structure.
The exterior of the amphitheatre is characterized by the repetition of what is called the fornix motif. That's a repeating bay, a repeating unit made up of pillars and the arched openings they frame, and these were decorated by columns. One bay would be from the center of the pillar to the center of the next pillar. So that's a fornix.
The advantage of the fornix is that it can be multiplied as often as required, both horizontally and vertically. In the Colosseum, it is repeated 80 times to make the perimeter and 4 times vertically, making the amphitheatre the highest construction in ancient Rome.
All of this system is bound up with the arches and vaults behind the building, and they're the structure that hold up the seating. So there's a massive weight of seating, both the numbers of people that are sat upon the seats, and they're made of stone, and so you've got a very considerable weight.
To support the weight of such a building, it was necessary to construct monumental foundations in the form of a ring that was 50 meters wide, at least 12 meters thick, and more than 500 meters in circumference. No fewer than 22,000 square meters had to be concreted. Thanks to the modularity of the fornix, the intensive use of Roman concrete, and a technique that involved constructing load-bearing pillars carved from travertine, Roman builders were able to deliver this immense amphitheatre in record time, in the same way as we do now with reinforced concrete structures.
So the Colosseum, despite its enormous size, to get that built within 10 years is one of those incredible statements that the emperor succeeds in making.
The monumental decoration of the facade, with 3 levels of arcaded galleries, something never before seen in an amphitheatre, was a further manifestation of the new supremacy of the Roman Empire in the world at that time. Instead of respecting the great classical architectural orders, at the bottom they used the Tuscan order, an order that was specifically Roman, despite it closely resembling the Doric. In the middle they used Ionic, and at the top, Corinthian.
This uses Greek orders for the very first time in a Roman amphitheater facade, however, substituting at a point closest to the eye of the spectator the sturdy native Italic Tuscan architectural order, an order associated with old Roman temples, which had fallen out of popularity to an extent and was revived in amphitheater facades.
By introducing the Tuscan order, the Romans were further underscoring their unique style over the Greeks.
It's a Roman spin on the traditional hierarchy of Greek orders, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, done deliberately.
160 statues in gilded bronze, 5 meters high and inspired by Greek mythology, decorated the arches on the 2nd and 3rd levels. 40 gilded bronze shields punctuated the attic level, again recalling the importance of military conquests for the Romans.
The shields were purpose-built specifically for the Colosseum, but they symbolized captured shields. I think the Colosseum is a statement of total conquest, especially of the once culturally superior land inhabited by Greek-speaking peoples in the East.
The interior of the monument was also beautifully decorated. The majority of these creations cannot be seen today, apart from the inside secret passage reserved for the emperor.
We don't know where this imperial tunnel started because it hasn't been fully excavated. That would be very difficult because underneath it runs a very busy road through the middle of Rome. But we do know that it came up underneath the seating area reserved for the emperor and his court.
This passage was probably one of the most richly decorated spaces of the amphitheatre.
In this passage, apart from the bottom of the walls, which are in white marble, the whole thing was colored, the plaster and the frescoes in different colors, and red in particular.
According to the specialists, it wasn't only this secret passage that was painted, but the entire monument. The other entrances to the amphitheatre weren't as sumptuous, but in their own way, they bear witness to the intelligence of the building's designers. One of the architect's biggest successes is the audience flow, which is comparable to that inside a modern stadium.
The invention of a monument constructed on flat ground with a structure of radiating walls and arches, and within which one can establish a flow system, goes back to the 2nd century BC, but the first really successful one was the Theatre of Pompeii in 55 BC. It was there that everything was perfected. The facade with the monumental arcades, because it is much higher obviously when the building isn't constructed on a slope, and there is all that possibility to design an internal circuit thanks to all that empty space.
Thanks to 80 entrances with double staircases and to the division of the building into vertical sections, the 50,000 spectators could get in or out in just 8 minutes with no risk to their safety.
Each spectator had a token, with the route they had to take marked on it, the door they had to enter by, and the route they had to take to the terraces, and then which row and seat they had to sit on. It was organized for the shortest route and the most efficient arrangement.
This efficiency is due to the numbering of the access points. Guests of the emperor could only get to their seat by going through the door marked on their token. And this method ensured that different social categories were kept apart.
The seats at the bottom were quickly accessible because you went straight towards the arena, towards the wall of the podium, straight ahead, straight away.
The senators had the most exclusive and quickest access route, shown here in red.
The public had to go very high up, straight up the staircases, gradually making their way to the inside of the building.
The seating of spectators in the cavea was very strictly governed. Closest to the show were the most powerful Romans, the senators. Above them were equites, then male plebeians, then finally the slaves, foreigners, and women.
It was a very efficient system, and modern stadia have taken inspiration from it. They share the same objective: to fill and empty a large entertainment venue as quickly as possible. They also use a similar subdivision into vertical sections.
But the Romans' technical prowess did much more than that to ensure the spectators in the amphitheatre had a good time. Latin experts at the University of Caen, where there is an incredible model of ancient Rome, are trying to establish what technology they used by studying ancient text, especially the celebrated work by Vitruvius, De Architectura.
The organizers spent considerable amounts of money putting on these spectacles, and the only way to ensure a return on their investment was to make sure the spectators went home feeling delighted.
And everything was set up to ensure this. For example, Seneca wrote that the spectators at the Colosseum were sprayed with a refreshing fragrance.
In these entertainment venues, they had what texts sometimes refer to as sparsiones, or it was sometimes described in other ways. And these sparsiones were always interpreted as water being sprayed on the spectators.
Using archaeological sources and texts from Vitruvius, Fleury set about creating a virtual reconstruction of the spraying machine, but he came up short. His machine was unable to produce a constant spray. He examined all the different versions of the text and totally revised the role that the air, spiritus in Latin, played in the proceedings.
In grammatical terms, we realized we could make spiritus the subject of the proposition, and as a result, Vitruvius was saying, either in a rather clumsy or maybe a too concise way, that it was the air that projected the water under pressure.
This reinterpretation led to a modification of the pump reconstruction, this time with the inclusion of air. To do this, the pipe has to be plunged into the reservoir to trap the air.
And because air can be compressed while water as a liquid cannot, this air here in the upper part of the reservoir serves to regulate the pressure. It is compressed when the operators start the pistons and is decompressed when the pump stops at the top and bottom of its cycle, which means it supplies constant pressure at the outlet.
But the technical prowess of the Romans was also called upon to protect the emperor's guests from the heat of the Roman sun. Sophie Madeleine has carried out an in-depth investigation into the retractable roofs, or vellum, made from sailcloth and used by the Romans for their theatres and amphitheatres.
Masts some 23 metres high have been suggested, which is huge. What's the point of going so high?
The masts need to be pretty high because if you put the vellum lower down, it would collide with the walkway and the entablature. You can see that they just fit.
They're almost touching.
Yeah, just above the portico.
So the height of the mast is the lowest it can be in order for the slope to work. We know that when the Colosseum was constructed, the architects planned to add a vellum. We know this because on the exterior facade of the Colosseum, you can still see the brackets that supported the mast. And just above them, you can see the holes in the cornice. The masts were placed through the holes and rested on the brackets. So there were 80 masts erected like that around the upper part of the Colosseum. And these masts supported the network of ropes that operated the vellum.
The engineers took techniques from the navy to create the structure, which is entirely made from ropes.
They used a central loop of rope that was first placed in the arena. Then they connected that to the mast with ropes and tightened these ropes to lift the central loop. Once the loop was in place, it was like a huge spider's web, and they could arrange the vellum on top as required.
The weight of the ropes was more than 30 tons. To compensate for the huge pressure the masts were under, Sophie Madeleine suggests they use the stone bollards that ringed the building, a few of which still remain.
We realised these stone bollards could have been used to tension the ropes and lift the central loop supporting the vellum inside the Colosseum.
With the web in place, it would have been easy to deploy the linen sails to shade the audience from the sun's rays. It would have been just as easy to remove them if it was windy or raining.
Can we put ourselves in the last rows of seating to see if it would have blocked the view?
I'll go through the middle.
Go ahead. There. If you lower the sails, they go down to the level of the ring?
Down to there.
There, you've taken the vellum up to 18 metres, right?
Yeah.
That's really great because no spectator inside the Colosseum would have been bothered by the lowering of the vellum.
Exactly.
A retractable roof to protect from the sun, a perfumed, refreshing spray. Nothing was left to chance when courting the favour of the Roman public. This desire to satisfy the spectators sometimes led to unheard-of luxury, particularly in the year 80, when the amphitheatre was inaugurated by Vespasian's son, Titus. In his Book of Spectacles, Martial, who was present at the Colosseum during the inauguration, wrote around 30 epigrams describing some astonishing days in the arena. Among the most surprising accounts are those that describe a series of two kinds of fight: gladiator duels in the arena and naval battles or naumachiae in a basin.
A naumachia is a staged naval battle. As its name suggests, it comes from the Greek, but in Latin, the term is only used for spectacles.
Anne Berlambagère has written a thesis on these aquatic spectacles in the Roman Empire. To her mind, There is an historical element that strongly supports Martial's description. The Roman nomachii were a key part of the imperial propaganda machine.
The point of these imperial spectacles was often to go one better than one's predecessor.
Emperor Augustus had a huge nautical stadium constructed to put on his naval battles in Rome and to demonstrate the breadth of his powers. Nero copied him by putting on his own nomachii in his amphitheatre in 57 and 64 AD.
Filling an amphitheatre with water represented exceptional technical expertise on the part of Nero, and Titus almost certainly wanted to repeat the formula.
At the time of the inauguration, none of the walls in the underground part had been constructed, so it was possible to turn it into a basin. But the question remains over where the millions of litres of water required to fill this basin came from. The investigation into how the Colosseum was supplied with water was carried out by Adriano Morabito, one of the founders of Roma Sotterranea, which, as its name indicates, is concerned with underground Rome. In other words, a paradise for archaeologists. He's gathered some strong evidence about the hydraulic network that enabled the nomachii to be staged at the Colosseum. A few meters south of Rome, the remains of several aqueducts bear witness to Roman mastery in the art of transporting water.
Aqua Claudia is a magnificent example of hydraulic engineering, a real masterpiece. Along the 68 kilometers, it keeps a constant angle. It was started by Caligula in 38 and ended by Claudius in 52.
These aqueducts, of which Aqua Claudia is one of the most remarkable, allowed Rome to grow into one of the biggest cities of its era.
At this point, the Aqua Claudia has brought an immense amount of water from the countryside for more than 60 kilometers. Now we are only 6 kilometers away as the crow flies from Porta Maggiore, the entry place in town.
With a flow rate of 5 million litres an hour, Aqua Claudia probably could have filled the Colosseum. But could some of this water really have found its way into the imperial amphitheatre? Part of the answer to this question can be found at Porta Maggiore, where 8 of the 11 Roman aqueducts meet.
When Nero became emperor and started building his Domus Aurea, the huge, big villa with gardens and a lake, he needed water. That's why he decided to create a new aqueduct starting from here, taking the water from the Aqua Claudia, one of the best waters in town, and bringing it directly to his property. We can trace the Neronian aqueduct from Porta Maggiore up to here on the Salian Hill, just a few hundred meters from the Colosseum. If the emperor wanted the water in the arena for its opening games, we are sure he was going to have it.
A new element inside the Colosseum this time seems to have played a role in filling the arena.
This is one of the 40 openings that are in circle around the arena and that were bringing rainwater from the top of the monument down to the underground. Some archaeologists speculate that this could have been used as well to bring water from the outside with an aqueduct into the arena to flood it when the nomachia were taking place.
The water level could not go above 1.5 meters without flooding the technical areas that were located at either end of the large underground axis. With 1.5 meters of water, it was perfectly possible to stage a nomachia, but it would have required 5 million liters of water.
Given the size of the arena of the Flavian amphitheatre, one could imagine 2, or at the absolute extreme, 4 ships. The main interest was in hand-to-hand fighting, and the fact that they could bring in water and then remove it again for other spectacles.
All that remains is to check if the basin could have been emptied in record time, as Martial said in his epigrams. While mapping the Roman sewers, Adriano Morabito has discovered an ancient drain linking the Colosseum to the modern city network.
This is the only collector still working today. In ancient times, we had all 4 collectors getting rid of the water out of the monument. So, because of the size and because of the large capacity they had, we can assume that the water was flowing out of the monument, even if there was 1.5 meters of water in the arena in a very short time, and probably around 1-2 hours.
So Martial was telling the truth. The inauguration of the Flavian amphitheatre was probably noted for these exceptional nommachiae. But they would have only happened once, because after that, the underground areas were developed. Seen from the sky, the hypogeum, from the Greek for underground, looks like an impossible puzzle. But it was in this part of the Colosseum, hidden from the public in ancient times, where these incredible spectacles were prepared. The machines they used have long since disappeared, and all that remains is a muddle of masonry, of brick, tuff, and soft limestone, piled up and overlapping. It's full of enigmatic notches and strange shapes that are difficult to interpret. But these walls contain the last clues about the equipment that was used to stage the extraordinary spectacles that the emperor put on for the Roman people. Architect Heinz-Jürgen Bester from the German Institute of Archaeology has spent years decoding the underground parts of the Colosseum with the aim of discovering what systems Roman engineers developed to allow animals or set constructions to appear on the floor of the arena, as mentioned in several Roman sources.
For more than 2 years, we have been researching here without really understanding how these systems worked. It has taken us quite a long time to determine which were the elements of interest to us and which were added later.
Bester is not the first to explore the underground parts of the Colosseum. In 1803, a dig confirmed the existence of the underground constructions with multiple walls. Unfortunately, this dig was soon flooded by the drains and rainwater.
In 1875 and 1876, when pump technology improved, they were finally able to get rid of the water, and it was possible to begin excavations again down to the bottom of the hypogeum. Oddly enough, many pieces of wood were found, and these wooden chevrons had been used as rails, probably to move the sets back and forth. Unfortunately, none of these pieces has survived.
Because the wooden elements that would have enabled a reconstruction of the elevator systems they used have now disappeared, they had to rely solely on a detailed examination of the carvings on the walls of the hypogeum.
Then one day, we finally realized that this stone and this wall had been worn away. We saw the same thing in this corridor, and in that other corridor, and in many more besides, and that's how we gradually pieced things together.
What Bester realized that day was how the different signs etched in the walls of the Colosseum could be interpreted as pieces in the puzzle that made up the stage machinery. The first clues to these machines were these big vertical and parallel grooves that go from the floor of the hypogeum right up to the arena. The second is this imprint left in the block of tuff when the hatch that was in the floor of the arena opened downwards.
Ah, that's very interesting. What we can see up there is a groove for the ramp.
The animals went up a 30-degree slope from their cage to the arena. The next clue wasn't in the walls, but on the floor of the hypogeum.
Here we have the base of a capstan. You can see where the bronze piece fitted, although it no longer exists.
The capstan was a key element of the elevator. It transformed human strength into energy to lift the cage. The walls were hollowed out to facilitate the task of the men working the capstan. The system required a second team to also turn it on another level, and you can still see part of that structure.
Here you can see that the wall has been hollowed out to make room to turn the capstan and pull the ropes of the elevator that was here, and to haul it up.
Once this system had been identified, Bester discovered that it was repeated 28 times in the underground passages of the Colosseum, making 28 elevators to bring the animals up to the arena. This would have certainly guaranteed some surprises for the audience, who would have had no idea what was going on behind the scenes.
All the machines were hidden, and the audience couldn't see them operating. As such, it was a complete surprise when the animals emerged into the arena. That was the main attraction, and its appeal over other amphitheaters.
Drawing on his training as an architect, Heinz-Jürgen Bester created scale models of the system that are on view for visitors to the Colosseum. But to validate his conclusions and to really understand how this backstage machinery worked, he needed to transpose his elevator to a life-size model.
It's a whole new challenge to go from a scale model to a life-size one. That's when your problems start, if you actually want it to work. On a scale model, you can always make adjustments and tighten things up, but once you've got a life-size model, it really has to be perfect.
The task has fallen to the Colosseum's head of safety, engineer Umberto Barufaldi, who's been observing Heinz-Jürgen Bester's work and who'll now transpose his model to a whole other scale. The man behind the idea goes to meet the engineer who will put it into practice.
If you don't do it like that, there's a risk that when you walk on it, it will come loose and will open up beneath your feet.
Yes, but that part there needs to be in metal, otherwise the wood will swell.
This part?
No, this axis here too.
Okay.
Yes, so the axis is a little more...
Back then they had axes in metal, so we can put one here. It is hard to believe that you can get to this solution from these drawings. That's what experimentation is about. We realized that a model was essential for this type of exceptional creation.
The arrival of Rossella Rea and Barbara Natero, technical director of the Colosseum, to see the first version of the model is an important moment. Without their agreement, the project to install a life-size model of the elevator in the Colosseum will not happen. But the practical solutions suggested by Umberto in the production of the model seem to have won them over. Perhaps their experiments might benefit from discoveries made in other amphitheaters. Some 300 kilometers south of Rome in Pozzuoli near Naples, there's an imperial amphitheater that was built 20 years after the Colosseum. Here they put on spectacles similar to those staged in Rome, and its design benefited from the experience acquired during the construction of the Colosseum. Its remarkably well-preserved hypogeum should offer plenty of information about the backstage machinery. This is what drew Swiss archaeologist Thomas Hufschmidt here to study the elevator systems in Pozzuoli. The underground areas of this amphitheater have thrown up a great many clues that are much more useful than those from the Colosseum.
In Pozzuoli, they benefited from that experience. They tried to construct lift systems wholly removed from the walls, like independent wooden structures. Furthermore, right from the start, they built a vaulted ceiling in Roman concrete to stabilize the transversal walls of the arena.
Of course, the wooden structures and ropes that filled these underground passages have completely disappeared. But that doesn't prevent an analysis of the walls.
This hole here, which continues below, was used to hold a post that went through the whole structure. From the two posts, they went through the vault, the holes for which we saw higher up. There was a structure to which our whole framework was attached. Here we can see two brackets on this side and two more on the other side. On them, in addition to the other beams, there were perpendicular beams that formed a framework to which the wooden structure was fixed and within which the elevator could go up or down.
But another key piece of information for the reconstruction of the elevators involves the way the openings were made in the arena. Most of them have been here for almost 2,000 years and have remained intact because, unlike at the Colosseum, the floor of the arena has been preserved here.
Here we have the original framework of this opening, cut out of stone, and you can see how this recessed part would have held a wooden cover, a large wooden cover that would have completely closed the hole.
This solid trapdoor was strengthened by beams that would have sat in these recesses.
So there would have been a cross-shaped reinforcement under the wooden cover to withstand heavy loads or heavy animals on top of it.
All these clues have enabled Thomas Hufschmidt to create a virtual reconstruction of the system that would have brought the animals from the darkened basement to the floor of the arena.
This system really takes into account our observations, showing that the cover closes from above. If the cover is pushed up from below, it doesn't need clumsy hinges or flaps that need to be operated from below the arena, which is the case for the reconstruction proposals at the Colosseum, for example. You can also see how the winch functions. So we have this arrangement with pulleys and ropes, exactly like what we learned from reconstructions of great sailing ships.
The reconstruction of the lift in the Puzioli Amphitheatre includes many technical elements that are similar to those used in the Colosseum, such as wooden structures, capstans, and systems of ropes and pulleys pulled from the naval applications to hoist up the cages. Only the arrangement for coming out of the cage into the arena clearly differs. But it's the fact that the structure is independent of the walls that is of particular interest to Umberto. Umberto is working with two technical colleagues to create the elevator. Flavia is a materials engineer.
I've been studying a perfectly synchronized system of pulleys and counterweights. The Romans used a very similar system because their technique was, in mechanical terms, very similar to what we use today.
The design is very good, but how are we going to hold that here for it to work?
Giovanni is an architect, and it's his job to transpose Umberto's model into 3 dimensions.
The problem is being able to precisely calculate the dimensions of the object because it can't be anchored to the wall. So we have to keep a certain distance from the walls and still create an object that has a regular geometry.
That's the position we planned.
The question is, how can you create a geometrically regular object to be inserted exactly into a space where none of the surfaces are flat? Every millimeter counts. A company that specializes in 3D imagery of old buildings carries out a precise scan of the passage where the lift is to be installed. This laser will sweep the whole space and can very quickly read billions of points that are instantly loaded into the computer to produce a 3D image of the passageway.
Try to drop it inside. Perfect. That's lovely.
At the foot of the Abruzzo Mountains, this virtual object will be converted into a real structure almost 10 meters high.
Da terra. Ah, qui siamo 201.
When you're making something 4 times as big, this amplifies the problems.
Hence the necessity to make all possible adjustments here before reaching the Colosseum. The capstan, which is the largest part of the construction, is made from solid wood and must be absolutely perfect.
When you see how big the elevator is, you can't help thinking about the Romans. How the devil did they manage to make such big machines? We're even struggling to do it with all our modern equipment they didn't have.
All'epoca loro non avevano gli stessi strumenti.
It's the big day for Umberto's project at the Colosseum. The elevator arrives as planned in one main block that will be lowered into the hypogeum using a huge crane. But first, the block has to be finished off with the various elements prepared in the workshop. The fact that it's very sunny with no wind should help things.
It's 600 kilos too heavy, and with such a long distance to transport it, that's a problem. We need to reduce the weight by 600 kilos.
They have no choice. It's too heavy, so the cage has to be moved separately. The crane operator is prepared to be a little bit flexible with his safety margins, given there is no wind. The elevator can be moved as tourists stare in amazement, and the Colosseum team watch on nervously. The block weighs several tons, and lowering it into the passageway is the riskiest part of the operation. The operator of this time machine has no direct line of sight on what he's doing. And only 3 centimeters of room for maneuver on each side of the block. And each stone of these walls is registered on the World Heritage List. This high-risk day was a success. The Roman gods have smiled on Umberto and Heinz. But there's a long way to go before the elevator is operational.
Now everything is in place, we have to make it work. First, we have to install all the missing pieces.
They need to add bearings to make the cage move smoothly, levers to action the capstan, and a drum for the rope to wind around.
We attach the rope here, and when it turns, the rope winds around it and lifts up the cage.
An impressive system of ropes is installed to obtain the necessary power to lift the cage when it's carrying an animal weighing almost 400 kilos.
We haven't tried it yet. We've only tested it with the model, which only had to lift 50 kilos. The real cage weighs 320 kilos. And that's making me a little nervous.
As soon as the rope system has been installed, Umberto wants to test it.
I tried to lift it on my own, but it didn't move. Not even a tiny bit, nothing. It's like an elephant. It's impossible to shift.
Umberto calls for reinforcements, but even with 6 people trying, they can't lift the cage or activate the access ramp.
The ramp is very heavy and the lever system we designed doesn't work. It won't lift it because the inertia is too great.
The solution lies with the pulleys. It was a good job Umberto brought some spares. With the extra pulleys and an adjustment to the rope system, the problem should be solved. This time, 8 men turn the capstan, as probably was the case in ancient times. The rope follows a complicated route, passing through no fewer than 32 pulleys, and the cage lifts from the floor of the hypogeum. Now the lift is ready, they're going to test it by releasing an animal into the arena. In homage to the wolf that, according to legend, saved Romulus and Remus, the 2 founders of Rome, they've chosen a wolf. Paolo Caldora is a specialist who rescues injured wolves. And it's one of the animals he's saved that will be participating in the experiment.
If it doesn't work, this is what I'll use the rope for.
You have to imagine that it's not just one elevator here, but a whole series, one after the other. The corridor was full of elevators, which was why the Roman spectacles were so magnificent. And with this life-size reconstruction, we can really get an idea of the scale of these games. They were truly fantastic.
The staging effects enabled by machines like these made the spectacles held in the arena much more appealing. But what kinds of shows were they that used the technical means worthy of today's music halls and theatres? On the programme for these fantastic days at the Colosseum were hunting shows, or venaciones, and gladiatorial combat. The first were held during the morning, and the gladiator fights during the afternoon. It's difficult to imagine today just how popular the venaciones were amongst the Roman people. These extraordinary hunting spectacles used staggering theatrical techniques that were made possible by all the elevators. Putting on so many spectacles for the Roman people with animals that would never leave the arena alive required the mass capture of wild animals across the Roman Empire and their transportation to Rome. Traces of this intense animal trafficking can be found in mosaics uncovered in North Africa, the south of Italy, and in Sicily. In the center of Sicily, near the little town of Piazza Armerina, there are the remains of a luxurious Roman villa, the Villa Romana del Casale, built in the heart of a huge estate on the route linking Africa to Rome. Animals are everywhere here. Professor Paolo Baresi is an archaeologist specializing in aesthetics of the ancient Mediterranean region and an expert in the villa's treasures. The first remarkable ensemble of mosaics describes hunting as organized by the master of the villa, the dominus. Like all the mosaics in the villa, the mosaic of La Piccola Caccia, or the Little Hunt, has some very unique aesthetic characteristics.
This is a fox hunting scene, and the shadows you can see beneath the dogs are a kind of representation that is similar to the African mosaic style. It's a way of representing the third dimension, of giving the illusion of depth on a plain white background. It's a convention in African mosaics.
This technique, which sought to create hunting scenes that were as realistic as possible, was also used for an even more majestic and striking work. Known as the Great Hunt, covering almost 350 square meters, it shows the capture of animals, mainly in Africa, in a kind of Roman atlas of the natural world.
This is a representation of the Roman world. Over there, in that apse, you can see the representation of Mauritania, while on the other side you have the personification of India. From these two places, the animals that were captured in the east and the west were transported to the two main ports, Carthage on one side and Alexandria on the other. This is how they were transported, firstly by land and then by sea to the port of Ostia, which was the final destination and can be seen in the center of the composition. Then they were taken along the Roman roads to the Colosseum, where they were used for the venationes.
This mosaic, which shows an extraordinary hunting spectacle, probably from the Colosseum and paid for by the powerful owner of this villa, provides a source of exceptional information about the traffic of animals to the morning shows at the Colosseum.
There aren't just lions, tigers and leopards, but also ostriches, rhinos, buffaloes and elephants. No doubt to satisfy the exotic tastes of the audiences of the Venationes and the Romans in general.
In addition to the exotic beasts and modes of transport, they also show hunting methods.
Here you can see an equité, a Roman knight who is capturing two tiger cubs, but their mother is chasing him. So the equité distracts her by dropping a glass ball in which the tiger sees her own reflection. The little reflection is so clear that she thinks it's one of her babies and stops, allowing the equité to escape.
Another mosaic from the middle of the 3rd century that was found south of Sousse in Tunisia has provided a wealth of information about the Venationes. This fabulously well-preserved work is almost like a reportage about the Venationes.
Mosaics that depict Venationes are quite common, but not a single one has ever been found that includes not only a pictorial representation of a spectacle, but also a detailed description of the costs involved, the procedures of the interaction between the crowd and the performers and the man who paid for it in the end.
And rare are the mosaics that show us the name of the person paying for the spectacle, in this case the editor Megarius, as well as the names of the venatores and the animals, in this case leopards. The hunters were called Mamertinus, a champion fighting with the great cat Romanus, Spitara, who always fought wearing stilts, fighting the leopard Victor, and Belarius, who has slain Crispinus. Why were these wild animals given a name? In reality, the warriors and leopards were probably supplied by the famous promoters, the Telegeni, who no doubt bred the animals in captivity to make them more aggressive.
The normal behavior for a leopard in the wild would be most undramatic and most unsuitable for a venatio, for a spectacle. The poor animal would just cower in the darkest shade underneath the arena wall, and it wouldn't move. From this, you can see that the Telegeni were the suppliers and the trainers, if you like, of these animals to bring them into a condition where they were suitable for, admittedly, this very cruel death that they met.
In the center of the mosaic, surrounding a kind of herald carrying a tray, there are 2 columns of inscription that reveals the importance of the editor, the person who paid for the spectacle, and the complex relationship he had with the crowd.
And says, gentlemen, I ask you to give the Telegenii 500 denarii for each leopard.
But we know, thanks to the mathematical symbol inscribed on each purse, that they each contained 1,000 denarii. The editor of the show was thus offering 4,000 denarii, twice what was asked.
Megarius is not just giving the asking price, he's paid double for every leopard. He's paid 1,000 denarii. So he is showing his absolute over-the-top generosity. 2,000 years later, we still know who Megarius is and what he did and the benefaction he gave to his community. So what better fame and immortality is there than that?
The animals weren't just there to appear in the hunting scenes the Roman audiences liked so much. They were also used to end the days of the worst criminals.
In the imperial period, in the morning you had wild beast shows. In the interim period, around the lunch time, there were executions.
Thanks to its imperial status, the Flavian amphitheatre was also a place where sentences meted out in the name of the emperor could be executed.
For the Colosseum's inauguration, the emperor introduced into the repertoire of executions Greek mythological kinds of execution. In the amphitheater, they were condemned criminals who were forced to dress up as Greek mythological characters, such as Daedalus, such as Orpheus, such as Icarus falling from the sky. The action of the myth was fulfilled in reality. The deaths really happened in this burlesque and piquant, violent fashion.
These macabre performances that transform punishment into spectacle were designed to consolidate the morals of Roman society through entertainment.
Especially when animals are involved, one doesn't know exactly how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, what kind of animals are going to be used. And this was all very suspenseful and exciting and frightening.
After these intervals, that were as popular among the big cats as they were with the audience, the gladiator combats would finally take place. When the Colosseum sprung up in the city of Rome in 80 AD, gladiatorial combat had already been around for several centuries, but the time when they were no more than a ritual in homage to the dead was long past.
If you look at the origins of the gladiators, when the Greeks, the Etruscans, the Campanians, and even the Romans honored their dead or prepared their young folk for war with these primitive duels, for me, that's not really gladiatorial combat. It became gladiatorial combat when these fights became professional and organized.
Everything changed in 1 BC with the gradual professionalization of gladiatorial combat. To satisfy their political ambitions, certain aristocrats turned these private funeral rites into munera, or spectacles for the people. They turned a religious ritual into a political tool, which resulted in the rise of the gladiator as a celebrated entertainer.
The gladiators became professionals, celebrities in the eyes of the public, who would write their names on the walls of the city, turning them into stars.
From then on, the gladiators, whether they were free men or slaves, learned the art of gladiatorial combat in schools called ludi. The gladiators were the personal property of the Lannistae who ran these schools and who exploited the gladiators for maximum profit. In Rome, the gladiators' lives were in the emperor's hands. Less than 100 meters from the Colosseum, you can still see the remains of the Ludus Magnus, an imperial school for gladiators where thousands of fighters trained every year.
The Ludus Magnus was part of a huge project set up by the Flavian emperors involving the amphitheater, 4 barracks for gladiators, and a whole series of buildings connected to them.
The Ludus Magnus is only one of 4 gladiator schools to have been found by archaeologists.
In 1937, during the construction of the building, the Ludus Magnus was finally revealed. They discovered the bedrooms where the gladiators lived and half of the arena where they trained.
The school consisted of military quarters where the apprentice fighters lived and a small elliptical arena like the Colosseum. The cavea could hold more than 3,000 spectators who came to watch the training sessions.
Another interesting aspect of the Ludus Magnus was that it was partially buried, mainly for reasons of security. One must remember that the majority of the gladiators were not free men. They were prisoners, condemned men, who chose to fight in the arena in the hope of being freed. There would have been a direct link to the Colosseum. There was a tunnel from the Colosseum that probably connected to the Ludus Magnus, which would have allowed the gladiators to go quickly from the school to the arena and back.
Unfortunately, the entry to this tunnel was not discovered during the 1937 excavations. However, the other end of the tunnel that arrived in the hypogeum of the Colosseum has been uncovered. It was nothing like the Emperor's secret passage with its fancy decoration. Here, the stonework is crude, and there are the remains of a terracotta tiled floor where the gladiators walk towards an unknown fate. During their 3 years of training, under the responsibility of the Lanista, who promoted the shows, the gladiators learned all the subtleties of the art of gladiatorial combat. Brice Lopez, a specialist in martial arts, has participated in many archaeological experiments involving gladiatorial combat.
In gladiator schools, the fighters were trained for the fight, the technical or physical part of it. There's no doubt about that. They were also trained in the entertainment side of things. Don't forget that these were spectacles, and the majority of the fights were between gladiators from the same school.
To ensure they put on a good show in the arena, the fights were organized between different types of gladiator. There were 6 types, and each possessed a range of weapons, an armatura, which was unique to them and required specific techniques.
The armaturae belonged to the school, and the gladiators who performed might have been a retiarius one day and a provocateur the next.
The provocateur had all the basic elements of an armatura: a leg protector, a leather breastplate, a leather manica to protect his right arm, a Roman greave, a helmet covering his face, and a shield.
The provocateur was the one who began things, because clearly it was with this panoply that you started the afternoon of games in the amphitheatre, but also training in gladiator schools.
The mumilo was the archetypal Roman soldier, the favorite gladiator of the legions. He was typically paired with Thracians and Hoplomachii, who represented foreign countries. Mumiliones stood out thanks to their crested helmets and great curved shields for protection.
You might compare them to moray eels hiding in their hole. They wait and then suddenly attack, going after their prey. It could be a counterattack, but also if the other guy is there in position, they just have to make a move, and in one blow, they attack so unexpectedly, so violently, so suddenly that the other guy is forced to move, and when he moves, they cut him with the dagger, overcome him, and win.
The Thracian is the best adversary for a mumilo. They were the old enemy of the Roman armies. Their whole technique was linked to their special weapon, the sica, a short knife with a curved, double-sided blade.
The Thracian used his sica to attack above the left shoulder and inside the shield on the right-hand side, always trying to find the correct angle to get behind the shield.
The Murmilo's other adversary was the Hoplomachus. His armatura was very similar to that of the Thracian, except that he held a dagger in his left hand and a lance in his right.
He's also known as Dimacher, or double fighter, because he could use both weapons at the same time.
But the best fight for the Colosseum crowds was most probably the combat between the secutor and the retiarius. The retiarius was only allowed to protect his head with a galerus, a leather sleeve ending in a metal plate. But he had 3 key weapons: a short dagger, a trident to keep his enemies at bay, and a net, or rete in Latin, which gave him his name.
The armatura of the retiarius was extremely complex. Not only did he have 3 weapons to manage, but also he was the armatura that required the most variations in terms of fighting distance. He had to be extremely tough and very fast over short distances. For me, this is the ultimate gladiator.
His adversary was the secutor. He had a manica of metal scales and a smooth helmet, so the retiarius's net couldn't attach to it.
In terms of technique, his name, secutor, says it all. He was the hunter, the pursuer or seeker. The secutor attacked his opponent like lightning. He charged him. He would try and cut corners like a predator chasing an antelope. If he always remained behind, he would never be able to catch him. So from time to time, he'd cut the corner to catch his enemy.
These different types of gladiator were the real heroes of the amphitheatre. After 20 years of experience in gladiatorial combat, Brice Lopez has demystified certain aspects of the spectacle. For example, with the help of cardiologists, he has shown that the seemingly endless fights as portrayed in the movies would have, in reality, been unsustainable.
These tests are conclusive. I reach my maximum heart rate of 200 beats per minute after 40 to 50 seconds of fighting.
Experimental archaeology has thrown doubt on the legends that persist today regarding the gladiators. And some fortuitous discoveries are also helping our understanding of the realities of gladiatorial combat, which is somewhat lacking. Excavations carried out in Ephesus on the Mediterranean coast of modern-day Turkey have shed light on the fate of gladiators during the empire.
During the excavations, we quickly realized we were dealing with something special because some of the tablets bore representations of gladiators.
Several of the tombs, some of which had headstones, were without doubt the tombs of gladiators. One showed a mumillo, another a retiarius, identifiable thanks to his trident. Thousands of bone fragments were discovered and matched up by a team headed by forensic anthropologists Fabian Kantz and Karl Groschmidt.
We were able to identify a minimum of 68 individuals, 66 of whom were young men aged 20 to 30. We found a great many injuries typical of the weapons we know were used by gladiators, and sword wounds in particular, going diagonally through the forehead. There were also round wounds, typical of those caused by lances or spears that had been plunged into the skull with a great deal of force. The most interesting of these round wounds were spaced 5 centimeters apart and were the result, we believe, of a trident injury.
What can we learn about the lives of the gladiators from these bones, examined using the latest pathological techniques? Dr. Kantz is particularly interested by a serious wound to the skull caused by a weapon during a fight.
This is the outer surface or outer side of the skull, and here is the inside part. The lamina interna, as we can see, is completely intact. This means that it hasn't been perforated. Here we can see regular bony tissue. The weapon penetrated here, but we can see that the healing process is very advanced. It was probably long, a year and a half, and isn't quite finished, but it has healed very well.
Is it possible that the healing of wounds was helped by a special diet, as mentioned by several Roman authors?
It would appear that after training, they were given an ash-based drink to help with stomach pains. For our research, we are hoping that this diet and ash drink will have left traces in the bone.
These traces may be detectable by the presence of strontium. For the first time in history, it will be possible to check these ancient sources by analyzing a few bone fragments in an atomic spectrometer that can detect the presence of strontium. But first, the fragments must be prepared for analysis.
Then, in theory, we should be able to find the traces left by stable isotopes, such as nitrogen and carbon.
Kantz has already analysed bone fragments from many other Roman remains found in other tombs in Ephesus. This has allowed him to establish the average level of strontium in the general population, and he can compare this figure to what he finds in the gladiator bones.
The flames change colour according to the elements present in the solution. The more concentrated the elements in the bone, the more intense the flame.
The colour of the flame shows that the level of strontium in this sample is much higher than that of a regular Roman citizen. And it confirms that the gladiators had a special diet to help cure their wounds.
They clearly had very good medical care, but that's no surprise given that the investment in gladiator schools was equivalent to what is spent on today's football teams. And to protect these investments, the gladiators got the best treatment available at the time.
During the Roman Empire, the gladiators received the best medical care possible to ensure a lengthy career and maximum profit for the lanista who owned them. But their survival primarily depended on exemplary behaviour in the arena.
If you won without being spectacular, without being engaged, without putting on a show for the audience, you might lose in your next fight and be put to death. If you were committed and demonstrated good technique, if you really gave yourself to the audience, even if you put a knee to the ground, you knew you wouldn't die.
The fate of the loser was then officially in the hands of a magistrate, and in the Colosseum, in the hands of the chief magistrate, the emperor himself.
The people not only interacted with the emperor, but also played a role in deciding if a gladiator would live or die. The emperor himself take into account the wishes of the people. It created a bond between the people and the emperor, but ultimately the emperor, of course, made the decision. But I think it empowered the people, it excited them, because they played a role in death.
Across the empire, the culture of gladiatorial duels was very fashionable. Thomas Hufschmidt defines several periods when amphitheatres propagated across the empire. Two were prior to the Flavian dynasty, when towns in the south of France, Spain and Italy acquired their amphitheatres.
The third phase was under the Flavians. The construction of the Colosseum really drove the trend, as well as ideology. At the same time, the Romans continued their conquest northwards.
The local elites in newly conquered regions, in modern-day Belgium, Germany and north of France, Switzerland and Austria, hurried to build smaller versions of the Colosseum to anchor these territories to the empire.
These two things were closely linked, the policy of expansion and the emergence of the amphitheatre.
Nothing seemed to be able to halt the relentless expansion of the Roman Empire. However, from the 3rd century onwards, the first signs that this power was eroding started to appear. In 217, the Colosseum was struck by lightning, causing a terrible fire that put a halt to spectacles in the amphitheatre. But the Flavians had planned for this. Less than a kilometre away was the Domitian Stadium, built by Vespasian's second son, Domitian. He also wanted to demonstrate his generosity to the citizens by constructing a stadium inspired by the Greek style to welcome Roman citizens. This stadium replaced the Colosseum for several years and left a surprising mark on the city. The very long Piazza Navona corresponds exactly to the arena of the Domitian Stadium. Other remains of the stadium, from its structure in particular, have been discovered in the buildings that edge the piazza. After several years, the imperial Munera returned to the Colosseum, which was able to resume normal service despite several earthquakes. However, the Romans were increasingly under threat as the boundaries of the empire were increasingly being pushed back.
Things were incredibly difficult. It was getting harder and harder to guarantee security of large areas of the empire, and therefore productivity declined, populations were affected, there were problems with disease. I mean, the inflationary trends reflected many, many issues, but they were nonetheless a fact.
To ensure the security of such a widespread empire, Emperor Diocletian completely revised its political and administrative organization, and he split the empire into 4 different zones. His reforms stabilized the frontiers for a while, but eventually it led to the emancipation of the Byzantine Empire at the expense of the western part, the capital of which was transferred to Milan. The situation was such that in 301, Emperor Diocletian took a very unusual step to stem the crisis affecting the empire. Inflation was such a problem that he published a list of maximum prices for a large number of goods, including, significantly, the wild animals destined for the Venationes.
Hundreds, thousands of individual items were listed and the maximum price that people were allowed to charge. The edict actually breaks down the prices into what it terms first and second grade quality animals. So, for example, lions of the first grade are priced at 600,000 sesterces, which is about 4 million euros. Second grade lions were priced at a maximum of 500,000 sesterces, which is about 3.25 million euros.
The growing number of days dedicated to spectacles in imperial amphitheatres as the Roman Empire expanded was probably also responsible for these excessive prices. But the most extraordinary games continued to be staged whenever possible.
Would have run into tens of millions of euros of expense. And that's assuming that the animals could be supplied, because that was the other side of the coin, that the supply of animals was becoming more and more scarce.
But once Rome was no longer the capital, did the Roman elites continue hosting the games? Has Heinz-Jürgen Bester found any trace of activity during this latter period?
They simply abandoned the underground areas they had created during the first phases of work. They left it submerged with stagnant water because the drains no longer functioned.
Because they were no longer capable of using the hypogeum as they had in the beginning, the Romans had to reorganize their operations and created a new floor 2 meters above the old one, whilst trying to preserve the functionality that had guaranteed their success.
The animals were moved up to this level. The cage, which would have been located here, was then raised up through this channel to the arena, forcing the animals to jump up into the arena. It was very important to the emperor and to the administration here in Rome that the spectacles or venationes, the hunts with animals, should continue during this later period, despite Christianity having become the official religion.
On the 1st of January 523, the last ever venatio was held in the Colosseum. The abundance of wealth that had flowed into the Flavian amphitheatre did not survive the transfer of the capital to Constantinople for very long. But the Colosseum has survived, becoming one of the most visited monuments in the world today. Its importance to modern Rome is remarkable, and it's left a wider mark on our culture, inspiring a society that is based on spectacle, a society that counts on being able to offer a show to the people. Another of the Colosseum's contributions to modernity involves the many Roman buildings that have borrowed its stones. For centuries, this exceptional monument that reflected the power of the empire was little more than an open-air quarry. As Rome became a capital once more, this time the capital of Christianity. As if to exorcise the blood shed in the arena by the pagan Romans, the papacy took symbolic possession of the Colosseum in the 16th century. A cross was erected in the middle of the arena, an arena that will hold on to its secrets for many years to come.